Chile es un país de poetas y traiciones. Chile is a country of poets and betrayals. It's a famous Chilean saying that reflects on the nation's complex history. Despite its fame, its origins are unclear and not one particular individual is credited with its creation. It is simply assumed that it evolved in response to Chile's rich artistic and cultural history as well as its political, social, and economic struggles. Despite these past struggles, Chile currently stands at the most developed country in South America, ranking at the 42nd spot on the UN's Human Development Index. Its path to development is often referred to as an example for other South American and even Eastern European countries to follow, but it hasn't always been this way.
Chile had many historic disadvantages standing in the way of its development today. Gaining independence from Spain in 1818, the country suffered from both internal and external instability as a consequence. The economic turmoil of the struggle for independence in the form of decreased production and foreign investment, mixed with conflict with neighboring countries such as Peru, Argentina, and Bolivia, led to a difficult period for Chileans. The Great Depression further perpetuated Chile's economic struggles as the demand for copper plummeted, which contributed to the majority of the Chilean economy. All these factors combined resulted in Chile switching between the extreme right and the extreme left political leaders, up until the establishment of Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship, during which human rights violations escalated as economic and political polarization reached an all-time high.
Since then, Chile has evolved from a nation plagued by political and economic instability to a thriving and developed nation in approximately 3 decades. In essence, the popular saying acknowledges the complex interplay between the cultural richness and the political instability that has shaped the country's developmental trajectory. Chile's success story exemplifies how a colony and authoritarian state can still develop and can provide a model for other historically disadvantaged countries.
Chile's democracy ended in 1973 when Salvador Allende, a Marxist politician, got elected as president, triggering a military coup led by Pinochet. Once he gained control of the state, Pinochet began his regime by recruiting a group of economists known as the Chicago Boys. Together, they promoted and created some important economic reforms, replacing the economic practices that preached strong state and protectionism policies based on the principles promoted by the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. These policies were often criticized by US politicians that viewed them as socialist threats.
Before moving on, let's provide some context. In 1955, an academic cooperation program was devised, known as the Chile Project. It sent 9 Chilean university graduates to the University of Chicago. Throughout the span of 5 years, they studied and developed a liberal mentality inspired by Adam Smith's ideology that praised action at an individual level and minimal state intervention. This group of students went on to be known as the Chicago Boys, later growing in size to about 26 members. Throughout the 1960s, they developed a text known as El Ladrillo. El Ladrillo laid out a plan for a new right, proposing a neoliberal economic model that strayed away from a closed economy, favoring private investment and promoting commercialization. Despite the text being planned out in 1969, it didn't get published until 1992.
With the Chicago Boys' radical ideas as the economic backbone of the dictatorship, Pinochet got to work on policies and reforms inspired or directly taken from El Ladrillo. Pinochet also received personal economic advice from Milton Friedman, a renowned American economist who famously referred to Chile's economic exponential growth as the miracle of Chile. He proposed a shock policy, which is where the famous phrase was born. I think that when a person has a serious illness, even more serious measures are needed in order to heal it.
Some of the reforms Pinochet set into motion included substantial cuts in public spending, economic liberalization, and preaching of private investment. In addition, some radical policies were implemented, such as the abolishment of the minimum wage and the privatization of the pension system. Private and subsidized education was promoted, and the funds for public schools and universities were cut. Although these policies served as a foundation for Chile's current strong economic situation, they were far from free and equal. After all, Chile was under authoritarian rule, and the dictatorship allowed Pinochet to make Chile his playground. Drastic reforms were executed under conditions that no democracy would allow for. Pure neoliberalism was in place. Public spending on education decreased from 3.8% of GDP in 1974 to 2.5% in 1990. The country's wealth inequality was also astonishingly high, with a Gini coefficient of 0.57.
It was not until 1990, with the reintroduction of democracy, that Chile experienced its real economic miracle. From the late 1980s throughout the 1990s, Chile underwent a period of stability, economic growth, and prosperity. During this period, Chile was also able to tackle high and unstable inflation, which was an ongoing challenge that had haunted the nation for decades. Chile's macroeconomic performance can be attributed to deepening first-generation reforms established during the 70s, as well as later established second- and third-generation reforms that would further fortify the country's economic and judicial systems. The next two democratically elected presidencies also pursued an integration into the global economy, which led them to follow liberalization policies that reduced tariffs as well as adopting several free trade agreements with various Latin American countries and Canada. These presidencies emphasized a crucial focus on education. Education has a clear and important relationship with human capital. A quality education creates strong, prepared, and educated citizens, which would serve as trained human capital and contribute to the nation's economic success. The government recognized its pivotal role in development, which aided in the long-term reduction of income inequality and simultaneously provided sustainable growth. The increased spending towards education resulted in reforms that improved teacher training, modernizing curriculums, and increased the number of hours children spent at school.
In addition, Chile's economic performance paved the way for a decrease in poverty and improved human development. Between 1990 and 1998, real GDP per capita increased at an average rate of 5.6% each year. According to the IMF, the official population living in poverty in 1990 was 38.6%. In 1998, that figure decreased to 21.7%. Programs that funded short-term income support helped with the reduction of poverty and created stable economic security. Life expectancy rose from 73 years to 75 years in 1997. Although the country, like the majority of the Latin American region, faced a crisis in 1999, the nation was able to recover from the economic downturn and did not resort to economic aid in order to prevent debts, a mistake that was previously made during the external debt crisis of the 1980s.
In the 2000s, Chile kept its economic legacy alive but faced challenges related to its social liberties. In 2000, Ricardo Lagos was the first elected socialist president after Allende. Throughout Lagos' term, lasting from 2000 to 2006, Chile kept its global economic involvement alive, such as signing an association agreement with the European Union in 2002, which essentially compromised free trade and cultural agreements. In 2006, Chile's first woman president was elected, Michelle Bachelet. Although Bachelet's government was faced with criticism due to unsatisfied students and a disappointing introduction of Santiago's new transportation system, she was able to further improve education and decrease poverty. Following Bachelet, Sebastián Piñera governed the country from 2010 to 2014. While macroeconomic indicators were thriving, social development was jeopardized. Students protested for an improved and fair education as they believed the curriculum was outdated. The following presidential term was Bachelet once again, and the beginnings of her term were marked with successful legislative reforms. These included both tax and educational reforms. Her presidency also promoted women's empowerment. With the introduction of the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality, she also approved the Civil Union Act legislation, granting rights to same-sex couples and thus advancing LGBTQ rights. Despite these advances, social unrest in Chile was still very much present. Many citizens protested for the constitution to be rewritten, as a lot of its content was altered during the Pinochet regime and further perpetuated unjust and unequal conditions for Chilean citizens.
Currently, Chile has an HDI value of 0.855, a 0.149 increase from 1990. This increase can be attributed to factors such as life expectancy, years of schooling, and gross national income per capita. Their 78.9 years of life expectancy, a nearly 7-year increase from 1990, can be attributed to the increase in access to equal healthcare, hygiene, access to nutritious food, and lowered crime rates, creating safer living conditions. Together, these factors allow Chileans to live longer lives and fulfill more as human capital. Thanks to the second and third generation reforms from the 90s, education was emphasized as a priority for the government. Since 1990, the expected years of schooling have increased by about 4 years, reaching 16.7 years, and the mean years of schooling have increased by 2.5 years, reaching 10.9 years. This has given Chile a lot of productive human capital that stimulates the economy. their GNI per capita has gone from $9,441 to $24,563 in the past 3 decades, likely due to a combination of the previous factors as well as their strong neoliberal policies. Their economy scores 74.4 on the Index of Economic Freedom, making it the 20th freest in 2022.
Chile can be seen as a success through the lens of the modernization theory, a theory based on the idea of development being entirely monetary, which is rooted in realist theory. The modernization theory suggests that to develop, countries should follow the path of the West by prioritizing economic factors and that social and political factors will follow. While this may appear true at the surface level, it ignores the fact that Chile's economic growth has not resulted in as much social and political development as it should have, and neglects the presence of Chilean culture throughout the process. Although Chile has seen significant economic growth, some citizens are still not content with its socio-political environment. Chile still has the second highest income inequality rating in Latin America, with a Gini coefficient of 44.4. Presumably, as a consequence, Chile ranks quite low on the happiness index, with the latest value measured at 6.17 out of 10. When considering that the world average is 6.7, this number is quite unexpected and goes against the fundamental idea of the modernization theory that social and political factors are bound to improve when the economy does.
The search for a silver bullet solution to development has turned the debate into one of semantics. There must be a definition for development to find a possible solution. However, rather than focusing on definitions, focusing on a case study such as Chile provides more insight into accomplishing development. Understanding that development is nothing but a form of art is the first step to development, a process which, when attempted to be defined logically, fails to fit within the bounds of step-by-step methods or explicable trends, which is a form of cultural and emotional expression, and which could not occur without both the poets and the portrayals. People recover from the past not by forgetting about it, but by learning from it, being inspired by it, and creating works of art and literature based around it. The very creation and preservation of this saying shows how Chile did not just prosper simply due to an emphasis on economic development, but rather due to its emphasis on culture throughout it all.
We say failed development as if the citizens are responsible, as though we are placing the blame upon them. They failed and we succeeded. This sort of language only further perpetuates the division between the North and the South. Therefore, when using Chile as a model for South America or Eastern Europe, it is important to emphasize that a replica of Chile's path is unlikely to end with success considering how individualized it was. Instead, the takeaway should be the developed paths should be formed in accordance with cultural identity and heritage, such as Chile's poets and betrayals.